I wanted to do this. I don't know how much participation we'll get the first time for this specific idea, but I wanted to continue to do this just to allow everybody to interact and get their name out there, get a video up on the channel, ask some questions. So I posted this link in the Discord channel. So make sure you join the Discord channel if you watch these videos. There'll be more of these broadcasts. Mason and I discussed doing a couple of these a week, potentially having multiple people come on and host these on StreamYard. You can host up to 6 different people at chatting in the chat at once. So it's easy to do, kind of like a radio call in where you bring people into the channel. So I wanted to try this. We'll see how this works out. But, I asked people to answer questions and to go over, any questions they had for Dynasty. And I'll go ahead and just start real quick by updating everybody with, we talked a couple times earlier on videos about where players are slotted to go in the NFL draft, and just a few observations. I updated the figures as of this morning, and just a couple concerns. The last video we talked a little bit about Cam Akers, and it's going to be really interesting to see where Cam Akers gets drafted, because Cam Akers essentially is being projected to go in the late fourth, early fifth round. Now, I think that is just a little bit ridiculous at this point, but I also wonder if is it possible that Cam Akers has just been overrated from a dynasty perspective, or from an NFL draft perspective, he's just not anywhere near what the prospect we thought he might be. And I've constantly labeled him as one of those tier one, I guess tier 1B running backs for this class. And he seems to be the one that has questions from an NFL perspective, which we all know how important draft capital is from an NFL perspective. We need players to get draft capital if we want to consider them high in our dynasty drafts. So I think that's the biggest concern right now, is the mock drafts have not moved Cam Akers up, despite his showing at the combine, and despite some of the narratives about him not coming from the best team, having a bad offensive line. I mean, he ran a 4.47 40, and his athleticism metrics are actually pretty good. I mean, he's near the top of the class, actually second in the class in weight adjusted speed score if you don't count Antonio Gibson. So you look at Cam Akers and you say he should be moving up draft boards, but I just haven't seen it. So that's one of my concerns with Cam Akers is, he's not moving up to a point where I'd be comfortable drafting him in the middle of the first round in a super flex draft. So that's the biggest thing, is Cam Akers is still right in that fourth round range. Mock Draft Database actually has him in the early fifth round once you compensate for the extra picks that got added in for the comp picks. So just something to think about. I think it's a player we've just slotted automatically into the first round of the draft. But at this point, if he doesn't get that draft capital, it's something that we're going to have to reassess. The other one is Antonio Gibson. A lot of these websites are now listing Antonio Gibson as a running back. Now, if Antonio Gibson gets listed as a running back, he's right up in that range where he could potentially get day 2 draft capital. So it really just depends on how he's listed. I mean, right now on fantasy sites, he's listed as a receiver. So for fantasy football today, unless he clearly has some sort of usage that shows he's a running back, right now he's going to be listed as a wide receiver. So that's going to hurt his value just a little bit. But I think if he gets that draft capital, right now he's projected to go as the 3rd pick in the 4th round. If he hits that, then there's a chance he moves up in dynasty boards, just because there's a possibility that he does get moved to running back eventually. I heard a comp the other day of Ty Montgomery. If you guys remember, Ty Montgomery was a day 2 draft pick for the Green Bay Packers, eventually got moved to running back because of how he was used, and essentially has been a running back ever since. Now, Ty Montgomery is probably a guy you don't want your rookie draft player to become. But at the same time, if he does get that switch, you saw, I believe it was 2017, how valuable Ty Montgomery was for fantasy when he got the running back designation. So something to think about. Antonio Gibson's moving up boards. Good chance he's probably a day 2 pick at this point, probably a late one, but I could see somebody picking him on day 2. So let's go ahead and go to a couple questions. So I'm going to bring in our first person. It's going to be George. Hey, George, how's it going, man?
Good. Just driving and dealing with family right now.
Driving and heading into the flock chat, huh?
About to stop right now.
Okay, well, hey, be safe. What's your question?
Who do you think is going to be this year's David Johnson from a couple years ago, or Devin Singletary?
In what context? Meaning that they're going to come out of nowhere and have impact, or because David Johnson, I'd say, could have gone the opposite way from last year.
Yeah, meaning where nobody had them on their radar, or I guess people did have them on their radar, but they were going pretty late in fantasy drafts, and then all of a sudden they're RB1s.
Okay. Well, are you talking specifically a rookie compared to like what David Johnson did in his rookie year, or just in general, all of fantasy?
Just in general and as a rookie as well. So if you got, as you know, if you got David Johnson or if you got Singletary, like Singletary last year, or if you got David Johnson when you drafted him, their value after their first year exploded. Like and I was able to get my highest draft pick for him was a 107, and I in late seconds to mid second rounds everywhere.
Okay.
And this one with David Johnson, at least in my leagues.
Yeah, so I'll answer it in both ways. I think first, if you just talk about a guy like Devin Singletary, I think a comparable player to him in this year's draft is probably going to be somebody like Anthony McFarland or Eno Benjamin. I think it depends on draft capital. I happen to like both of those guys, especially Eno Benjamin. Because of his age. I know I've talked about this on a couple videos. I like Eno Benjamin. He's the youngest running back in the draft. And so that's a player that if I see him get drafted maybe round 5 or higher in the NFL draft, I think he'll creep up draft boards, but you'll be able to get him. If you remember last year, you remember that range at the end of like super flex drafts is what I usually reference, but you remember that range like Justice Hill, Damian Harris, Alexander Madison, Devin Singletary. There was kind of like a third tier of running backs that no one was really sure about their jobs. They were all 3rd, 4th, 5th round picks, and everyone kind of just took stabs at those players. It ended up being that Singletary was the one that emerged along with Madison were the ones that were big value from that tier. So I think the biggest thing is, one, the players need to get the draft capital. You know, this year we're not going to have a lot of running backs that are drafted 3rd, 4th, 5th rounds. We're not going to see as many backs drafted in those rounds ranges as we saw last year. So that's going to be the first thing is who are the guys? It could be Eno Benjamin. It could be Anthony McFarland. Could be Darrington Evans. Could be Joshua Kelly. I mean, there's a ton of names of guys that could go 4th or 5th round. But Eno Benjamin's one I'm specifically looking for. If he goes there, I'll be higher on him. He'll probably be my running back 6 or 7, which you'll be able to get him most likely before others because people will have A.J. Dillon over him. People may have some other guys that had a little bit more buzz pre-combine and even after the combine. So I'm really high on Eno Benjamin because of his age. So I guess if I had to predict right now, that would be one that I think could potentially be in that range. For the David Johnson one, I've said this on a couple other videos. I'm super high on Ronald Jones, and I hated Ronald Jones for the first 2 years. But I look at Ronald Jones and I see what he did last year at the age that he did it at. Ronald Jones is actually about the same age as a lot of the rookies that are coming in this year. And if you look historically at guys that did what he did last year at that age, basically he was an RB2 last year, a real fringe RB2 last year. And what he did at his age, I actually think he's one that, his value is going to probably go down if Tampa Bay signs somebody in free agency, because people are going to think they don't have confidence in Ronald Jones. But I'm actually really high on him. He's one of my most aggressive buys. And if you need a running back, I would much rather buy him than pay up to buy, guys like Melvin Gordon or Le'Veon Bell or, any of those kind of risky running back 2s right now in Dynasty. I'd rather buy Ronald Jones because I think you can buy him a little bit cheaper. And you can probably buy him for a pick outside of the range to where you're really going to get a solid day 2 receiver prospect. So like in a 12-team Superflex league, you can probably get him for a late 2nd round pick. And at that point, if you look at some of the receivers that are starting to go there, that's where you're starting to take shots on guys like Tyler Johnson or Donovan Peoples-Jones, guys that may not have the draft capital or have a lot of question marks coming in. So that would be my answer to the next David Johnson. Would I be potentially Ronald Jones? I think he's still really undervalued. And this is coming from a Ronald Jones hater. I did not like him at all coming into the draft. I didn't like what he cost, but I think now it's worth taking a shot on him.
Yeah, I definitely didn't like Ronald Jones coming out, but your podcast has got me into buying him. He's going pretty cheap. It's not like if you're wrong on him. I'm not saying you, the fantasy community. If you're wrong on him buying him, it's not like you're going to spend a lot to acquire him, anyways.
Right. Well, exactly. And I mean, the thing is, though, if you're looking to draft a running back, I've been saying this for a while. If you're looking to draft a running back in this draft, and you ask a question on who would be the next Devin Singletary, it's tough to say because even if some of these backs get pushed up, like say Zach Moss or AJ Dillon, I can see both of those guys going higher in drafts than historically their draft capital says they should have. If they're fourth or fifth round picks, they're going to be going in like the early to mid second round of superflex drafts. You're going to be picking them over, a guy like KJ Hamler or, someone like probably not Denzel Mims because he's moved up enough, but receivers that went comfortably in the second round. People are going to be reaching on running backs because there's just not a lot of other options. So I guess my approach right now is before I click draft, and I'm not going to do it because I'm not going to take Zach Moss or AJ Dillon probably at that spot. But if you're considering a running back in the draft, shop the pick to see what other running back that you can get out there. And I mean, the reason I pivot to Ronald Jones is because he's basically the same age as the guys you're drafting. He's essentially younger than Zach Moss or really close to the same age as Zach Moss. So who would you rather have? I'd rather have the guy that produced last year and was a second round pick on top of that. And because you're really not gaining anything by age.
Yeah, most definitely. Man, I would love to continue chatting with you because it's been an honor. But I got my wife calling me.
All good, man. All good. Thanks for chatting. Yeah, that was a good question about the next Devin Singletary and David Johnson because it's interesting. He brings up David Johnson, and his value's in the tank, and that could be a guy that, ironically, that could be a guy that ends up, actually competing with Ronald Jones in Tampa Bay if he ended up going there. So we'll see what happens with that. Not somebody that was huge on Ronald Jones, but I think it's an interesting answer. The bottom line is this draft class, the draft capital is going to be huge for that next tier of running backs. After the top 5, and I know before we started the chat, I mentioned Cam Akers. I still am going to include him into that top 5, but after that top 5, it's going to be completely wide open. So it makes you wonder, who's going to get the draft capital. There's players that I prefer and players that I don't. I actually, from a bias standpoint, I hope it's somebody like Zach Moss that ends up going, mid 4th round of the NFL draft, maybe early 5th, because people will inevitably push him up the boards. Same with AJ Dillon. I'm intrigued by AJ Dillon, but probably just in a point per carry league is where I'm really interested in AJ Dillon.